So hey everyone, this is part 3 of my Roland JX-8P repair. I will link parts 1 and 2 down below where I cover I went over most of the repair for this unit. Went through a lot of different things, I won't repeat them here. But in this video the focus is mainly going to be on the keybed, both in terms of rebuilding it, replacing some bad keys, Aftertouch as well, I'm going to go over that. And then a handful of other little things on the synth too that I didn't get to that I need to follow up on in this video. Obviously the keybed is gone right now, so I'm actually filming this somewhat out of order. I've got the video in place that I will show here where I actually start going through the keybed itself and doing the repairs there and discuss the Aftertouch. So next step is to finally tackle the keybed. I'll be pulling this apart and just documenting some of that process. So there's 4 screws on the bottom underneath, and then 3 screws are along the top here. They need to be removed. Once those are out, the keybed will at least start moving. You still got to deal with the cables though. So this cable over here is for your Aftertouch, and then these 3 cables going to the keybed here are for the keybed itself. So keybed is out, and to remove these keys, first thing you need to do is just remove all the springs across every key there. So the method I like to do this is to use a small dental tool. That way you can kind of hook onto the spring and then remove it gently like that. So this way I'm keeping pressure on it with this and my thumb. That way if anything goes wrong it doesn't go flying, and I don't lose it, which is kind of nice. Once all the springs are removed, there's a step you have to do on the back, which is pull up these little plastic strips. So there's a plastic strip that runs along the whole entire length of the keybed here. And what this does is it prevents the keys from sliding forward. So the problem is you can't remove the keys until you remove this plastic strip. So you need to actually lift it up and take it out of here. Okay, so that's removed. Now all the keys will just basically slide forward and then lift up like that. So they are disgusting. These are semi-weighted keys too. No Roland red glue problems on this synth or any other synths that use the same keybed. So here's a close-up of that keybed with all the keys removed, and you can see that just based on the keys alone, like a lot of stuff's been spilled in this over time, liquid, who knows what, and then it drips down into the keybed. Then you end up, with everything sitting here, and you can see the rust lines on this from this whatever moisture sitting there that fell through the keybed. Now, I'm going to clean all this up, obviously, before I put it back together. One interesting thing about this keybed, like I mentioned, is that it's actually got these mechanical key switches, which is actually pretty nice. So these are pretty reliable compared to the membrane type, the rubber type that you see on most synthesizers. So I'm going to blow all the dust out of here too, just make sure that's all out and wipe it all down, clean it all up. Every key on this was working, so it wasn't an issue there. And then I've got my 2 keys as well, which will be replacing the 2 bad ones, which I marked. It's got that burn mark right in the center of them. But I'm going to soak all these and then wash them with just some soap and a soft brush, clean them all up, make them look like new. So here is my keybed, all nice and cleaned up, and then I got all my keys, which I cleaned as well. So the keybed itself, it still has a light bit of surface rust on there, but I mean it's clean, nothing's coming off on here. I cleaned it up pretty well. Gently blew dust out of all the key contacts across the bottom, just to get any little fuzzies and stuff that was floating around down there. So I'm overall happy with this. This little bit of surface rust isn't going to hurt anything. You're not going to really get much off of it there unless you really take it apart and scrub it down, but this will be fine. And then the keys, you can see they're all nice and clean now. So compare it to the old keys that I had in there and see how much nicer that these turned out overall. A couple of them still have a little bit of mark right on the top. Kind of see like right there. It's in the plastic pretty well on the key. It's just from coming in contact, the metal top of it being pushed down into the keys. But it's right along where the cover comes in, so you don't really see that on any of them. But I was having a hard time getting that out. Alright, so next I want to talk about Aftertouch. So this strip right here is the Aftertouch strip on the synth. This is a common problem with a lot of these. A lot of people have asked me about this in terms of the synth. And on mine, I verified that it is not working. So I want to talk about a couple of the reasons why, what goes wrong and how to fix it. So there's kind of two cases of this being a problem. The first case, which happens on many of the earlier synth, many of the earlier JX-8Ps, was actually kind of a design fault with this, I guess you want to call it. What would happen is moisture would get into the strip over time and it would degrade and it just wouldn't work anymore. And Roland actually issued a service bulletin about this in terms of how to fix it. I'll show that up on the screen here so you can see it. I just found it with some searches. It's out there available if you want to read it. Which basically to fix it requires you to take it apart, peel it apart, and actually clean the surfaces and then potentially, recarbonize them just with some graphite and then reassemble it back together. I'm not going to do that with this one because I've actually tested this and I know it partially works. I'll show that here in a second. So the second fix basically has to do with the resistance of this being not as high as it should be. So what that means is, in the case of mine, when I put pressure on it, it still is providing, a resistance out. But the actual circuitry that drives the Aftertouch sensitivity, which then, it's an analog circuit based on an op-amp. It's just an amplifier, essentially. And that drives one of the small analog-digital converters in the unit, converted into digital space so that the CPU can do the math to adjust the parameters and the filters or whatever else you may have, have an Aftertouch modify in the synth. Anyway, the resistance coming off here is too low. So if you look at the schematic for this amplifier, the linearizer, as they call it in the actual schematic itself, it's just a simple inverting amplifier. And that the gain by this amplifier is made up of two resistors, R7 and R8. So the resistance values for those two resistors there as set by the factory basically is not enough gain to allow the state of my synth with the resistance coming off this Aftertouch to actually trigger it. It just there's not enough resistance coming off this to do anything to the actual op-amp circuitry. So one of the fixes is basically to adjust the gain stage of that inverting amplifier so that you can create more gain and allow this to work. So one of the fixes that you can do for this, which I'm going to do for mine in my state where I know this is still working, is adjust the gain of that op-amp, the gain stage on there, so it's actually able to work with the resistance and the voltage coming off of this strip that's on my synth. So just to show how you can test your Aftertouch real quick to see if it's working at all, I've got the Aftertouch strip hooked up to a multimeter here just on the ohm scale, and you can see that not touching it's basically open, infinite resistance. You put your hand on it and it'll actually 100k ohms, 90k ohms, about 96, 99, 100. So I'm putting a decent amount of pressure on here though too. I'm not lightly touching this. I'm pressing it pretty hard. So having any given point, all the way 41k there. I'll even touch all the way down the very end off camera, but same thing. I'm getting about the same resistance. So it is working. You got resistance there. But as I mentioned, it just requires, quite a bit of resistance to do it. Now if I just touch it lightly, I'm putting just a little bit of force on it, you can see it's, a couple megohms at that point. The thing you want to be careful with if you modify the resistance of that gain stage I was showing is you don't want to make it too sensitive, because if Aftertouch is on, you don't want your synth sending Aftertouch MIDI information just on every single keystroke. It's just barely touching this. So you got to kind of find a sweet spot if you're going to modify it. Actually, let me grab an analog meter. This will probably be easier to visualize. All right, so got the Simpson out and just lightly touching it here. You can see it's getting some resistance on it. Again, right now I'm not pushing super hard, but it's a little bit easier to see that, on the analog meter than it is the digital. So, and of course, if I press hard, it's almost about to where I was before, about 40k. So, because I know the Aftertouch strip is good, I'm going to not worry about that right now. I can modify the circuit, which is actually on the slider board, the import board there that's got all the actual op amps on it, in terms of that circuitry, after I get this back together. So it'll be a little easier to test. So next steps is I'm going to reassemble the keybed with all my keys, and then basically put it back in the synth, and then we can address the next couple things. One quick correction I want to make is regarding the springs. In the previous video, I think it was part 2, when I took the keybed apart, I mentioned that all the springs for the white and black keys were the same. That's actually incorrect. This keybed does have 2 different size springs. They're the same length, but the diameters are a little bit different, as you can see there. Very subtle, but you can pick on up, just a little bit that one's larger than the other. So as you're putting these back together, note that the one with the larger diameter goes to the black keys, because those need a little bit less resistance than the ones on the white keys, which are a little bit stiffer spring. Alright, keybed is finally back together, so I can finally reassemble the synth. The keybeds are always the worst part. They're just time consuming and boring. Keep that in mind as you're working on these. Before I put the keybed back in, I'm just going to spend a few minutes and just clean this up a little bit better. There's still some tape residue and some dirt and other garbage on here I want to try to clean up. So, just using the Tech Spray plastic and glass cleaner. This stuff works really well. So it's looking a lot better. There's a couple things here. I thought this was sticker residue, but it actually looks like some corrosion coming through a little bit right there. I think there was a sticker here at one time and that got wet, and some of that moisture is what got to there. Then over here too, it took a little bit of work because there was definitely stickers over here in the past, and I used some glue gun to try to even get that residue off. It just did not want to come off. So I got that pretty good. Again, there's scratches, there's marks, there's flaws in this, the paint wear, which I mentioned before. So it's not terrible. I knew what it was when I was getting, so for the price, again, I can't complain. If I ever do come across 2 end pieces, I would like to replace those, just because they're the 2 parts that kind of make the synth look a little rough. But alright, let's throw the keybed back inside. One last thing I want to do too is the display. At the end, I'm going to mask it off and put some plastic polish on there. It's just pretty scratched. Somebody cleaned it with paper towel or something abrasive and just scratched it. And that's kind of what, that'll make your display look a little dimmer than it is too, compared to, if you polish that up and make it look crystal clear. Alright, so all the keys worked, went through the keybed, and we're good there, so back to Aftertouch. I've got the the control board pulled back down again, so I can start playing and seeing what's going on with the Aftertouch circuit. What I've got right now is I've got the synth set to Organ 1, I believe is the patch on it, and I've got this potentiometer here is the basically your adjustment for Aftertouch. And I've got Aftertouch set to Brilliance on the front panel here. So if I press, any key, press really hard, you've actually got a little bit of Aftertouch there. But I mean, I'm pressing really, really hard on it. So I've also got the scope hooked up to one of the resistors here. I'll show them the schematic in a second so I can see actually the gain I'm getting out of that op amp. And we'll show the scope screen here too so you can see that gain. From a scale of, on the voltage scale, I'm getting, pressing it down almost over 5 volts off on some of the keys there, which is good. So here's the schematic for this volume board right here. And this section at the bottom, which they call the linearizer, that's actually the op amp, the gain stage for the actual Aftertouch. So this connector is your Aftertouch coming in, which is that resistor that makes up the actual Aftertouch sensor. And then it goes into this op amp, which is basically an inverting amplifier. So you can see they've made a couple revisions over time with this. A couple values here, 56K and 600K resistors on there, and they had 2 others on this input as well, almost like a voltage divider, that they've removed. They don't exist on my circuit. So at least on the version of the service manual here, they've made those changes. So mine actually follows the new values that are here. which in this case for R8 I've got a resistor of 470 ohms, and for resistor R7 I've got a resistor of 15K. So the issue I have is I'm not getting enough gain off this resistor sensor here to produce the voltage required to actually drive the AD converter on the actual synth to run the Aftertouch. So the positive input of the op amp down here goes back up and over to the voltage, or to the input slider, which is this one right here. The negative side, obviously, you've got your gain side here via this resistor. Now the gain on an inverting amplifier, in this case with this circuit, so the gain is calculated by R7 divided by R8, and then you take the negative of that because it's an inverting amplifier. So in this case I've got 15K divided by 470 ohm, which ends up being a gain of negative 31. So I want to increase that gain across this op amp. And to do that, I'm going to basically take this resistor value here and increase the resistance value of it. What that value needs to be, I'm not sure yet. So just as an example, if I were to put a 47K resistor in there, I would get a gain of negative 100. That might be too much, might be too little, I'm not sure, I'll have to play with it. So for testing, I might even drop an adjustable resistor in here in place of that resistor, maybe 50K, 100K, something like that. So I've got a little room to play with, and I can adjust that and actually make the adjustment for this and see where the sweet spot is. Okay, so after a lot of playing on this board, which I'll talk about here in a second, I got Aftertouch working. So what I ended up doing is, you can see I've got a couple modifications, additional modifications to this board here. I've got two resistors that I've tacked on, and I've got that adjustable potentiometer there. So looking at the schematic, initially what I talked about was this resistor that gives you your negative feedback. By basically increasing the value of this, you increase the gain of the overall amplifier, which I did. I put a 50K adjustable resistor in here, which was originally this one right here, and I adjusted a little bit, and I wasn't really getting much difference, in terms of the amount of gain out of this synth. And at that point, I was at 50K, which 47K, I'm already at a gain of 100. So I'm like, well, I'll try something bigger. So I put a 100K pot in there, and it ended up not making any difference whatsoever. So, at that point with 100K resistance, the gain is technically extremely high, and it's diminishing returns of what you're doing. So you can do the opposite in terms of getting your gain up, is you can decrease the value of, in this case, R8. So on R8, I just tacked on, I think it was another 47K resistor down there with parallel resistance calculation, or not 47K, I'm sorry. This was, I think, 220 ohm. So with parallel resistance calculation, a couple hundred ohms, pretty low. And it made a little bit difference, but still not enough. So again, bringing this down isn't going to help much at that point. I've got to bring the positive side of the amplifier higher. So to solve that, going up to the Aftertouch fader here, which is VR2 on the main board, you've got this 150K resistor in line. So with that, I put on a 50K resistor in line with that, lowering the resistance down quite a bit to 20, 30K, something like that, based on that parallel resistance. I'll have to do the math. Anyway, that made the difference. So once I did that, I brought my Aftertouch back, and you can actually tell that now the gain I've got basically here across that op amp is doing something. So again, if I crank this all the way up, I can actually very quickly, actually I'll just do it here. Aftertouch is way too touchy at that point. So bringing it back down, somewhere, I think I had it around there, is a good point for what I'm used to in terms of feel that I typically see an Aftertouch on most synths that I have. So maybe even still a little bit too high, but I'll play with it a little bit more, and I'm going to have to calculate these values out. I'm going to try to actually not leave these resistors hanging on there. I'll put the proper resistors on there, calculate the value, and put those in. I may leave this adjustable one in here just to give me some flexibility in the future in case it deteriorates further, or if I want to tweak it a little bit more, this will give me the flexibility to do so. So bottom line is, with this, you're going to have to play with the values for those resistors around this circuit and this one up here, depending on how old your Aftertouch is and how the resistance you're getting off there. As I mentioned before, I was getting, I think, around 40K off of this to the circuit, and I think that should be down like somewhere around 1 or 5K or something like that, fully pressed down in the with the pressure on the Aftertouch sensor. So that is why I'm having to do this and modify the circuit to get to get these values to where I need them, where this is actually working now. So just quick rough off the top of my head, I think I replaced this resistor here, which is R8, with around a 220 ohm resistor. This resistor here, which is R9, I replaced that with something around 35, 37K, somewhere in there. I know these are odd values, just find the closest actual real value resistor that you have that matches those. And then finally for this potentiometer here, I've got a 100K pot in place right there, but a 50K pot would probably be just fine as well. A couple little last details I wanted to talk about that I didn't get to in the last video. So if you remember, I replaced this potentiometer with an aftermarket one, which wasn't the same. It wasn't the same as the original spec Roland unit, because these are obsolete. Now the problem was that the arm in this one, the you mount the slider to, little cap, was smaller than the rest of the pins on there. So all these little caps, the plastic ones, would fit perfectly fine on the other ones. On this, it kind of wobbled around. So to solve that, I put a couple layers of heat shrink on there. So I put one on, warmed it up a little bit, see if it fit. Nope, not quite. Put another one on there, and then did it until it fit perfect. And 2 ended up being the magic number. So it's on there nice. It doesn't fall off. It's on. It feels really good. So I've got that issue solved, and I can just reassemble the rest of these keycaps and put them on the remaining potentiometers there. So I have this almost back together. Inside there's a couple zip ties I'd cut that I replaced and just made sure all the screws were in the right places. I didn't miss anything. But it's still not screwed together. I'm going to do that very last, just as a last check. But before I do that, I wanted to take a look at this display. So it's really scratched, and it doesn't show up on video here too well, but looking at it in the light, it looks really bad. And I'll take some pictures of it too with the exposure up. That might be able to catch it a little bit better so you can see how bad it is. This is caused by cleaning this plastic with abrasive materials, usually paper towel. And that's how you end up with plastic like this. But the good news is you can still restore it and get it back to a nice clear shine, basically. And to do that, I use these products by Meguiar's. So the Professional Clear Plastic Cleaner number 17, and then you follow it up with this Clear Plastic Polish number 10. Get those in frame there. So these are great for all sorts of plastics. They're good for automotive. They're good for marine. You can use them on basically any type of clear plastic, and they work really, really well. So I'm going to mask this area off right here just with some painter's tape, and then just take a microfiber cloth and work this stuff in, buff it out, and then follow it up with the actual polish as well. Right. So the cleaner is first. So some of the scratches in there are pretty deep. I'll do another run through with the cleaner. Let's see if I can get those out a little bit more. That's looking a lot better. Still not perfect. Like I said, some of the scratches are pretty deep. Alright, so now we'll do the polish. Alright, that's looking much better. I'll get another photo of this afterwards to see the final finish on it. So this concludes the JX-8P repair. This has been a good synth to work on through the past couple of videos that I made, because it basically had every common problem that you see with these things. So there was a lot to discuss through the series of videos here. But in the end, I'm happy. Again, I didn't pay very much for this to begin with, and it cleaned up really nice. It's got a couple little flaws and stuff like that, but it's in significantly better shape than it was than when I got it. And the good thing is everything works. Every single thing works. There's not a single problem with this currently at the moment. And based on all the preventative maintenance I went through, through these videos, it should stay like that for quite some time. So this has been fun. I hope you enjoyed this series on the JX-8P, and thank you for watching.